that. And the chat happens to be over here on another screen for me. That's why I keep looking over there. But anyway, I have straight up on the hour, so we're going to and get started. I'm going to mute everybody for the webinar, just because some people are depending on the recording. And I've done enough of these over the years. You know, we've heard babies crying and dogs barking and toilets flushing. I don't want to go into all of that, but anyway, that's what happened. So from those of you who, as you registered, I asked you some questions about some things that were going on in your church. And these were some of your responses as far as the biggest coaching issues that you're currently facing. So 57% of you said identifying and recruiting coaches. So who do you recruit? Who's going to help you? 39% said how do you train them? 30% said lack of communications between the coaches and the leaders, and that could be an issue, obviously. 26% said creating a job description, because you know if you don't know what they're supposed to do, how are they going to know what they're supposed to do, right? 26% said unclear about the coach's role, which kind of goes with the job description, I suppose. So you could be in one of several stages of coaching, and I'm not going to pick on anybody regardless of what stage you're in, because at one time or another, I've been in ministry this year, 30 years full-time ministry. So at one time or another, I have sat in each of these stages at some point of that 30 years. So you may be at the stage of coaches. What coaches? And I was there for a while. Maybe you have some resistance to coaching because you don't, it'll, like me, you got to let up on a little bit of control. Maybe you've just started recruiting coaches and you're just, are thinking about it, or fixing to, as we say here in the South. Maybe you're a small group. The small group pastor runs all the huddles and roundtables. I did that for a long time. Maybe you're just starting out. Maybe you have a seasoned coaching structure and you just want to figure out how to tweak it a little bit, how to make it a little bit better. Maybe it's just too various to describe. You're just doing all kinds of things and, not 100% sure on how that's going to roll out. All right. So let's see. This is me. I've been a pastor, like I said, for 30 years. My wife and I have been married 20 years this year, coming up in a few weeks, actually. We have 4 kids, 3 boys and a girl. Our sons are 18, 14, and 6, which means I have a high school senior and a kindergartner this year. And then our daughter is 12. I've coached over 1,500 churches in the last 16 years. In the last 10 years, I've helped churches start over 15,000 groups and have connected over 125,000 people in groups, which is pretty crazy to think about, but we've had a lot of fun. What I do individual coaching with churches. I have coaching groups. I have a group right now, and it's from literally all over the United States, South Carolina to Washington to North Dakota to San Diego. We're all over the place. I do some online courses, which I'm going to tell you about in just a little bit. I have some one-time on consultations where I go in and help churches figure out their obstacles and their opportunities for groups. I've got a couple of books. Exponential Groups came out 3 years ago, and then Leading Healthy Groups came out a couple of years ago. And then on the screen, you see the Exponential Groups workbook, which is actually coming out on the first part of April. Once I get my feedback back to my editor and we get it to the press. But this is going to be kind of some updated thinking from the original Exponential Groups book, as well as a workbook. So there's a lot of exercises in this that I do in my coaching. So Christian Book has a pre-sale already going on it, just to put the pressure on. But anyway, I'm excited about that because I like writing books and sharing my thoughts. And then I blog over at alanwhite.org, which is probably how you ended up on here. So let's talk about these 10 biggest coaching mistakes. Let's get going here. All right. So the first mistake is you have groups, but you have no coaches. So you're not utilizing coaching at all. So your group leaders in this scenario are going to last for a while. And I did this for quite a long time. Some are going to figure it out and continue on and be fine. Others are going to burn out, or they're going to quit, or they're not going to feel supported. They're going to kind of feel like a lone ranger out there, and they just won't make it. And here's the problem, is that everybody needs encouragement. And, even in our church, when our church was smaller, we were about 350 people. I served two churches, one in California. I was on staff there for 15 years. And then one here in the Greenville, South Carolina area that I was on staff for 4 years. And so the church in California, when I came in, we had about 300 adults on the weekend. Our founding pastor had to resign, and we went from 300 down to 85. So I was there to witness the growth over that time from 85 to 1,500. And then, of course, the church here in Greenville was much larger. It went from 3,500 to 6,500. But the nice thing about that is that, I can kind of relate to these different stages as churches grow. So when our church in California, that was 85, we got to about 250, and people had the sense of, I don't know everybody anymore, which, as Rick Warren says, it's not important that everybody knows everybody, but it is important that everybody knows somebody. And so then we got to kind of getting closer to 350, 400, went to 2 services. And then it was more of a dynamic of people saying, I can't find the people that we know. So this was our first attempt at groups. This was back in 1994. And so we selected 10 of the top people mature people in our congregation. We gave them an assignment. We said the commitment was 1 year, 12 months. Everybody got a group together. I don't know if we assigned people to groups. I don't know how we did it back then. And all of the groups started in January. All of the groups quit in December. And now our church was only 350 people. So we had our senior pastor, our second senior pastor. I was on staff. We had an assistant. So, but 350 people. I still knew everybody's name. And we got to the end of the year, and we wanted to find out, why these groups weren't going to continue. And the leaders came back to us and basically said, we kind of felt like lone rangers out there. Now, here's the interesting thing to me, is that here were 10 couples or singles that were leading these groups in a church of 350. We saw them every single week. And we talked to them. So why did they feel like lone rangers? Well, we weren't doing anything intentionally to coach them. We just kind of threw them in the deep end, and off they went. And, this kind of came back to bite us because they all quit, including the group that I was leading. That's how it goes. So everybody needs somebody to care. Everybody needs somebody to encourage them. Years ago, Chuck Swindoll said, every person you see is a person in need of encouragement. And so we need encouragement. We need to know that somebody's there for us. Not in any kind of a heavy-handed way, not in a way that you're bugging people, but in a way that we're checking in. So again, I made this mistake. The second mistake is trying to coach the leaders alone. And so this was kind of the second round that we had. We took a couple years off from groups and then restarted. And I was the coach because I figured, well, it's small. How many coaches do we need? And I actually did some intentional things to coach. And sometimes we buy into this myth that if you want something done right, you're going to do it yourself. And, for those of us like me who are recovering control freaks, that's a very easy myth to buy into. See, there's not enough of you, though, to keep up with more than 8 people and do the rest of your job. And I don't know about you guys, but I've never had the luxury of only being the small group pastor. When I was at our church in California, I was the associate pastor. And what I came to understand was that the associate pastor associates with everything that the senior pastor doesn't want to associate with. So, but practically speaking, I supervised all the adult ministry. I had all of the children's ministry. The copier salesman came in. He was talking to me. There was a season that I led worship in the church. It wasn't a very good season, but I wore a lot of hats. And so to try to do all of that and move forward with groups was challenging. And even the larger church I was at, 5,000 adults on the weekend, 6,500, kids and everybody. I was still over adult discipleship. So we had classes. We had, I didn't do support groups. We had them in the church, but we had home groups. We had different kinds of studies. We had seasonal kinds of things like financial peace and things like that. And then I had all of the affinities: women's ministry, men's ministry, singles, couples, parents, business leaders. So when you get to be that much, you might be able to keep an eye on them a little bit, But the reality is you're kind of like one disaster away from everything falling apart. And so you really don't want to coach alone because, you may be able to keep tabs when everything's going fine. But the reality is people are not receiving the level of care that they might need. And, and the answer to that is to multiply yourself. And we'll get into that a little bit. You're going to feel lousy about your lack of coaching. I did. I thought I need to do better with these people, but I was just, spinning so many plates. It took all my effort to keep all my plates spinning. I couldn't really, delve any deeper into coaching. And then your leaders are going to feel like you're making mistake number one, which is you don't have any coaches, even though you're supposed to be the coach, right? All right. So the third mistake is you choose the wrong people to be coaches. So, this is what I did. You take them out to a meal. You present them with a job description. This is what coaches are supposed to do. You pick up the check so they feel obligated. And then they say yes, but then they don't do anything. And it could be that, out of loyalty, they can't tell you no. It could be that they have good intentions, that they really want to help other leaders, but they don't get around to it. I was sitting with some coaches at a church down in Middle Georgia, and they had launched a ton of groups. And we were going around the room and just talking about their experience and what was anything, what might have been a struggle for them. And one of the coaches, and I don't know how this detail got missed, but the new leaders hadn't had an opportunity to meet the coaches in person, which is something that I almost insist on, because coaching is a relationship. And how can you have a relationship with a person that emails you or texts you or calls you on the phone? And so we're going around the room, and this one guy, he was in his 40s, and he said that the problem he had was he was given a list of new small group leaders to follow up on. He never met them. And this is what he actually said. He was afraid to pick up the phone and call them because he didn't know who they were. And I was almost dumbfounded. I just sat there and thought, how is this a grown man is afraid to pick up the phone and call people just to introduce himself and say, do you need any help? So again, the weakness was they didn't meet in person. Now this church, to their credit, they were 2,500 on the weekend, 2,500 adults. They connected 5,000 people into groups. So, what they were doing was fast and furious, but what they needed was that step for people to meet the coach. So these coaches had good intentions with this one guy. He just wouldn't pick up the phone. Some people just want the snazzy title of coach, and they don't really want to do anything. I don't know that anybody thinks coach is a snazzy title, but I made this mistake. You've had people that, they seem like good people. They seem like, solid believers. They look the part, whatever. But I've recruited people, and, the old adage that, just because they look like a duck and talk like a duck doesn't necessarily mean that they're a duck, because sometimes they're a turkey. And I've had a few turkeys in my day. And so I think they're picking the wrong people. So knowing what to look for, and sometimes even giving people a little bit of a trial run at coaching so you kind of see them perform before you give them the title, I don't think that's a bad idea either. Fourth mistake is unclear expectations. So what are coaches supposed to do? And that's a good question for all of you to answer, because many churches get stuck. They hear these large ministries, these large churches talk about coaching. They hear people like, I heard coaching from Carl George, who's a friend and mentor of mine. He wrote a book back in the early 90s called Prepare Your Church for the Future, which is an outstanding book. It's still for sale. It's still worth reading. But he basically, in Prepare Your Church for the Future, recorded the model that Youngie Cho was using in Korea, and what he came to term the meta church model. And so I knew that there needed to be coaches because of all of these references. But then part of my problem early on, even when I recruited coaches, we were at a bit of a loss because I didn't know exactly what they were supposed to do. And so a lot of people are like, well, I don't know, what's a job description? What are they supposed to do? And so they never recruit coaches knowing I'm supposed to have these people called coaches. I have no idea what they're supposed to do. So I don't know how to recruit them or who to recruit. And so the result ends up being either no coaches or you have coaches that are bored and confused. I had one coach, her name was Carol, great lady, dear saint. And she came to me one day and she said, I'm kind of bored. I said, I wonder why Carol's bored. I'm busy. Why is she bored? And the reality was I was still running all the training. I was running all of the huddles. I was doing all of the stuff, partly out of my own insecurity, but partly because I was learning all of this for the first time too. Well, Carol was bored because I was doing her job for her, as far as the gatherings went, but I hadn't given Carol a clear idea of where she was supposed to go. So a lot of times that's a mistake, that we're just not, we have coaches, but they don't really know what to do and they're willing to help. And then after a while, you just kind of give up on it because nothing's happening and they don't have any clear direction. Number 5, and this may not be anybody else in this room, but this is me. And that is keeping control. So you don't want any problems. I don't want any problems. I don't think you want any problems. And so if you don't know what leaders are doing, there are going to be problems. That's the thing. So we tend to overtrain and over supervise, even though doing this alone, we can't. And so this was kind of the mindset I was in for a long time, is the only way that you became a small group leader in my church was if I knew you personally and thought that you would be a good small group leader, that you had good character, no drama. You know, I grew up in Kansas. I don't like drama. So I had to know you, and then you had to go through my training, and then I had to be your coach. And that was the only way that you were going to be a small group leader in my church, because I wanted to make sure we had quality control. And so I did this for 7 years, tried to follow the meta church model that Carl George developed. We did okay, but not great, because we got to a point where we had about 800 adults on the weekend, and I only had 30% of them in groups. And it got stuck. I mean, some years I would try to do a turbo group, which is a concept I got from Carl, where I would invite prospective people into a turbo group. And some years we would launch 10 groups out of that. So a turbo group is a group that's for training. So I would put them 6 weeks of intensive small group training, met once a week. And then the purpose of it was, at the end of the 6 weeks, is that all of these people in the turbo group would go out and start their own groups. And so one year we got 10, and one year we got 2, and one year we got 0. And I thought, well, this isn't working. Because the other thing that's supposed to be happening in this meta church model was that all of the small group leaders were supposed to be recruiting and training an apprentice. And then once a year, the group would release the apprentice, and the apprentice would go out and start a new group, or the apprentice would keep the current group, and then the leader would go out and start a new group, you know, however that ended up. So in 7 years, I had one group that trained one apprentice and sent them out in 7 years. So I went back to my friend Carl and I complained to him a little bit. I said, you know, this meta church thing doesn't work. This apprentice model doesn't work. And he said, well, the apprentice model works well in educated congregations. And I thought, well, geez, Carl, thanks. And then I kind of muttered under my breath, the apprentice model works well in Korea. Nothing against Korea, but you know, culturally, some of these things, G12 and some of these things we bring in from South America and other parts of the world, they work great in the context they came out of. They don't work so great in the US. Because one of the things, and I'm sure you guys feel this, people don't want to leave the group. People want to stay with their group. They become kind of a family, like we promised them. And, you know, we talk about, oh, it's birthing, it's multiplying, it's not dividing. And the reality is we might as well call this a small group divorce. And so we struggled with that. Again, I'm doing all the coaching. I'm monitoring all of this. And I don't know what it is that we think we get people in a room at the church and we seat them in rows and we train them and train them and train them. And somehow, I mean, for me, this gave me some kind of security that, you know, I had good quality control of this thing. And the reality was, I don't know if people were listening. I don't know if people remembered what we talked about. I mean, half of them didn't show up because when we do training, we train the people that are new. And so our established leaders don't need that. So they just quit coming. And then we get frustrated with them that they're not, you know, they're being disloyal. They're not coming to our training when our training really needs to be more relevant, right? So this was me trying to keep control of this thing, not giving, not multiplying myself, not giving leadership to other people. And so our overall small group ministry became limited to the number of leaders I was capable of leading. And it wasn't growing any further than that. The other thing was, I'd been there 12 years by then. And I pretty much knew everybody because the church grew by about 100 a year. We didn't grow, dramatically. And I was running out of people that I knew to invite to be leaders of groups. So again, this overtraining, over supervising, needing to control, something had to give. And I started hearing about other ideas about how groups were multiplying without dividing and how people were rapidly starting large numbers of new groups and stuff like that. And I was challenged by that because I was so frustrated after 7 years, I couldn't get more groups going in my church. And so I was challenged by these ideas, but I was also kind of threatened by them because it meant I was going to have to give up, control. So I went, I remember I actually prayed this. I said, Lord, I want this to grow. I want to see some of these results that other churches are seeing of getting people, discipled and connected into groups, but I just can't give up quality control of these groups. And God called me on it and just spoke to my heart and said, Alan, when you say quality control, quality is your excuse. And God knows I'm from Kansas. He knows that he can talk to me straight. He doesn't, he just gets to the point. And I was so convicted by that. And I knew that it was absolutely true. And of course, for me, the end result was I invited more people in to come onto a team with me to coach. And then, of course, the other thing was then we started admitting a lot of new leaders, some that I had never met before. And the difference was we went from having 30% of our adults in groups. We doubled in one day, which forced me into coaching. And then within 6 months, we had doubled again. So we got to a place where we got 125% of our average adult attendance in groups. Now, that's not funny in pastor math. The reality was we had 800 adults attending on the weekend. This is our church in California. And we had 800 on the weekend. We had 1,000 in groups, in ongoing groups, not just one-time church-wide campaign things. And so by then, I had to have more help. But it was because of this control we got stuck. And I know I camped there for a little bit. And I don't know if this is meaningful to anybody else, but it was a real problem for me. And another great Rick Warren quote is, he says, you can structure for control or you can structure for growth, but you can't structure for both. And that's something that I had to overcome in order to see the ministry work. And it did involve very much multiplying my own ministry. All right, number 6, lack of accountability. So you have coaches, but what are they doing? So you have to inspect what you expect. So the first thing you have to do is you have to give clear expectations. We talked about this a couple points ago, but one of my coaches actually told me this way. He said, expectations need to be, and this is worth writing down, expectations need to be clear, reasonable, and accountable. Expectations need to be clear, reasonable, and accountable. So they need to know they need to know exactly what they're doing. Reasonable, it has to be something that they could possibly do. And then the third thing is accountable, and that gets to this issue here, is that if I ask a coach to call a couple of new leaders every week as they're starting out, then it's my responsibility to be in contact with that coach to make sure those phone calls are being made. Because I've given them an important job. And because I've given them an important job, I have to pick up the phone and make that phone call to make sure that important job is being done. Because if I don't pick up the phone and find out what's going on with the coaches, then what I'm communicating is what you're doing is really not that important. But if, as the small group pastor, as the small group director, I'm picking up the phone and calling to follow up and hear what's going on with the leaders, then I'm communicating that this is important. I'm communicating that I expect them to do what we agreed to do. And if there's a problem, if I've given them too much to do, or if something's come up and they can't get to it, or the leaders aren't responding or whatever else, then I help them solve a problem. I'm not going to scold them for that. But that accountability has to be there. And I don't know what it is. But and I haven't served on the staff of a church now for, since 2011. I've worked with a lot of other churches, played in their sandboxes. But if I, as a pastor on staff, if I had a list of 10 things to do, and one of the 10 things to do was to pick up the phone and call my coaches and check on them, or call my small group team and check on them, I tell you what, I would put all my effort into the other 9 things, and then I would just hope that 10th one of making phone calls would go away. And I really struggled with this for a while. I thought, is this some kind of laziness on my part? Is this, why do I want to pick up the phone and check in with these guys and encourage them, make sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing? And I don't want to make too much of this, but my conclusion really came down to was, it was almost like a little bit of a spiritual battle. And again, I don't want to make too much of this, but it's this thing where, the enemy comes to steal and to kill and to destroy. So in the enemy's playbook, he doesn't want me to pick up the phone and encourage the coach, and then make sure the coach is picking up the phone to encourage the leaders, to make sure the leader is, encouraging the group members. He wants to divide and conquer, right? And again, I don't want to make too much of it, but I almost think there's that place of not wanting to hold people to accountability. We don't want to make people feel bad. For years, it's like the things I avoided doing or asking or saying because I didn't want people to feel bad. Now, what I've learned over the years is this, that sometimes in order for people to change, they need to feel the pain of their own actions. Because if I'm the only one feeling the pain, they're not going to change. And what we understand, and you've been through these experiences, sometimes the things that are the most motivating to help us grow spiritually are the painful experiences in our life. Now, I'm not volunteering for any more painful experiences. I'm stocked up. And in fact, our 2020 has started out in such a way that my 14-year-old was kind of wondering if we could just skip and go to next year. And I was kind of with him for a while. First 2 months was rough. But the reality is that sometimes it's picking up the phone, and you don't say, are you making your phone calls? But you pick up the phone and you say, hey, what are you learning from your leaders? And then that coach says, oh, I haven't talked to anybody this week. And they say, well, why don't you take the next couple of days and call your leaders, and then I'll call you on Friday and see how it went. So now I've given them an incentive. I've given them a reminder. I've given them a deadline, and they know this is important and this is something that they need to do. And so we need to inspect what we expect. Won't people resent it? They won't. Because I found there have been a few coaches over the years that, they just got in the weeds. They wanted to coach. They committed to it. They were available to do it. And then something came up with work or something came up with their family. Life just kind of got in the way, and it wasn't anything that was presentable. They just kind of went into an intense season and they weren't able to do it. Well, it was almost a relief to them when I asked them how their coaching went. They said, well, I got to be honest, this stuff has started happening. I can't do it right now. And I said, well, you know what? Thanks for letting me know. And I'll find somebody else to take over your responsibility. And rather than them continuing to feel guilty about not doing what they agreed to do, and their leaders not being coached, I just gave the assignment to somebody else, because it's understandable if things would come up and you wouldn't be able to get to something. And so I want to know that sooner rather than later. I don't want to wait for somebody's report to find out that there's a group that's in trouble or that they're not doing their coaching. Because honestly, if you're waiting to hear what's going on with your groups and with your coaches from a report, you're already in the weeds. You need to have regular conversation with, and I wrote about it this last week about Exodus 18 and Jethro's my advice to Moses, so I won't repeat that. But if you're in a church with hundreds, then your coaches should be your leadership team. And if you're a church of thousands, then you should have a level above your coaches. And so the church in California, my coaches were my leadership team. My church here, at 5,000 adults, we had 4,000 of them in groups I was only there 4 years. But anyway, it's not all about me. We had a lot of stuff going on in that church. But I had a team of 8 or 10 leaders that I met with once a month. They had coaches. The coaches had groups. And so this way we provided some semblance of actually real accountability to make sure things were being done, to make sure we knew if something was coming up in a group so we didn't get blindsided. Because the reality is I would rather have a coach address an issue with a group when it's small than if, as a pastor, the issue is coming to me. Well, the incentive to come to a pastor with a small group issue means this problem is big. It has gotten out of control. It's gotten out of hand. It's not going away. And to me, that's kind of the wrong time to address issues. You want to hit them when they're small. And that if the coach is making regular contact with the leader, then you have a better chance of doing that. But if you wait till it comes to you, then, I mean, you're just stepping into a hornet's nest. All right. Let's go to number 7 is the wrong assignments. So do coaches need to take reports? Do they need to take attendance reports from the groups? Do coaches deliver the information? So I came here to this church of, 6,500, and they had an interesting system that the small group leadership team was all volunteer. We would gather once a month, and this is how my predecessor handled this. And my predecessor gave me a great structure, but we had to tweak it a little bit. So we met once a month. I would give them information, and then they would meet with their coaches. They call themselves directors. That title kind of went to their head a little bit. But the directors would meet with the coaches. The directors would take the information I gave them and give them to the coaches. The coaches, in turn, would take the information the directors gave them that I gave to the directors and give it to the small group leaders. And then the small group leaders would, some of it was just for them, some of it was for their groups. Then the coaches would collect a report from the small group leader. Then the coaches would give the report they collected from the leader to their director. And then the directors, when we met together, would give the report to me. Now, if this sounds like a bad version of that telephone game we used to play as kids, where you started with a word or a phrase and you went around the room and by the end it got to be something completely different than what it was, that's exactly true. Because I thought, I arrived here in 2007 and, I'm not going to say anything negative about South Carolina, but I thought, good grief. Don't they have telephones? Don't they have email? Don't they have the internet? I don't need to play this bad game of telephone. So if you have email, if you have a database like church teams that sends out a reminder, a request to get a report every week, you don't need to do that. That's the wrong assignment for coaches to have to, dispense information and to collect reports, because we can do that electronically. But there's a part that we can't do in a meeting. There's a part that we can't do electronically. And that is, you and I can't have a personal relationship with every one of our small group leaders. And our coaching is built on a relationship. So you can't on a regular basis pick up the phone and call all of your leaders. You can't on a regular basis go out and have a cup of coffee with leaders and encourage them and hear what's going on with their group and help them troubleshoot something. So that's a better assignment. But this thing about, some of this administrative stuff, that you take people that are relationally good, people that want to invest in other people, people that are willing to mentor, and you give them, a task basis. There may be a report to fill in, but if you give them all administrative tasks, it's the wrong use of them, because this administrative stuff we can do electronically. All right, number 8, coaching everyone exactly the same way. Because some of you were thinking, because I just said a minute ago about coaches calling leaders every week. Every coach doesn't need to call every leader every week. Your family members probably don't even like the same movies. So if you think about your family, I mean, my family's very diverse because I have a senior in high school, I have a kindergartner. So we know there are very few times. I think Toy Story 4, all 6 of us went to the movie together. But usually I see movies about cars with my oldest son. Of course, we went and saw 1917 with my oldest son. My 14-year-old, we go to Marvel movies. And then the younger kids, we do kids movies. Um, so, I mean, your family's at different stages. Well, your leaders are at different stages. So experienced leaders don't need basic training. And this is a lot of times why experienced leaders don't respond to our training, because when they show up for training, we're appealing to the least common denominator, which is the new leader. And so when the experienced leaders show up for training, we're taking them back to kindergarten. And so this is kind of interesting. How do you know what training to give to your leaders? Ask them. Well, how could I ask all of my leaders? Well, if you want to do it in a broad sense, I used to survey my leaders, and then every week I would write a blog post um, that anonymously answered one of the questions. The person asking the question was anonymous, not me. So we got questions, everything from, how do you get more consistent attendance, to how do you deal with overly talkative people, to how do I get my group to do their homework? My favorite of all time was, how do I meet all of my group members' emotional needs? And of course, the quick answer is you don't. But I wrote a blog post about that. Now, that's how you found out in general. And then actually, most of those blog posts, that's how I started my blog. And the book that I mentioned earlier, The Leading Healthy Groups, that's kind of the foundation of that book, plus a lot of other information. But the better way, better than a survey to your leaders, which is one way to do it. But a better way than that is for a coach to talk to individual leaders and find out what's going on with them, and then give the answer as close to the need as you possibly can. I was talking to a small group pastor a few years ago. He's from Texas, and he had a background in corporate training. And he said, this may sound strange, but in his experience, even having a background in corporate training, he found that the best answers came from the people who were the most proximate to the person who needed the answer. So it wasn't necessarily the most qualified person, the most knowledgeable person, the most experienced person. The best answers came from the person that was present and available when the leader had the question. And so I think that builds a pretty good case for coaching, because again, rather than killing yourself with all of these meetings, and people hate meetings. Do you know that? People hate meetings. They don't hate you, but they hate meetings. I got down to doing 2 meetings a year. We did a meeting in the fall, because that was always a big push, a big campaign to give information about that. And then we did a retreat after the new year every year, and usually brought in a speaker and budgeted for that. And the leaders paid their way. But I didn't do monthly meetings. That was with coaches. And I've even found in recent years, if a coach has 4 or 5 leaders, to try to get 4 or 5 people together in the same place on the same day is nearly impossible, because we have this 24/7 culture. But to meet with people individually, and some of it's a phone call, some of it might be an in-person meeting. With younger guys that I've coached, younger pastors that I've coached, it's text messages. It's easier to text them than it is to get them on the phone, because they don't want to talk, but they have questions, and then you go back and forth in a text. So we need to treat our leaders differently, because when they're new, they need more attention, they need more direction. But as leaders become more experienced, if we keep treating them like new leaders, they're going to become resentful of that. Some of them are going to track with us just because they're loyal and they want to do what the church is asking them to do. But sometimes we make it more painful than it needs to be. And so we really have to consider, once they get to a point and they have enough experience, they know what they're doing, that we go from telling to asking. How is your relationship with God? What is your spiritual next step? How are you developing people? And it becomes more of coaching through questions rather than coaching through telling. New leaders don't need space. They need help. But experienced leaders need space. All right, number 9. I got to get on with it here. Too many direct reports. How many people can you keep up with? You can't keep up with every single group leader. You can't keep up with every single ministry leader. Sometimes you can't even keep up with every coach, and that's when you have to have a small group team. So How many direct reports? I mean, honestly, can you keep up with and know something about and be current with and all of that? We got to take that into consideration. Number 10, unsupervised coaches. You have coaches, great. How do you keep up with your coaches? Each coach could oversee 100 people. So if a coach has 10 groups, there's 10 people in a group, that's just simple math for me. They have 100 people. Isn't it important that you keep up with somebody that has influence over 100 people in your church? I mean, whether your church is hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands, 100 people is significant. So how are we keeping up with them? All right, so now you have a few more answers, maybe to coaching. I'm going to guide you through something that I've created to help churches build coaching structures. And these are some of the churches that have participated in this training. And if you stick with me through my next 5 minutes, and then we'll get to questions and answers. But if you stick with me, I'll give you a digital version of the chapter 4 of my Exponential Groups book, not the workbook yet because it's not out. But anyway, I'll give you that coaching chapter if you stick with me to the end. And I've got the list here so I can see who's been nodding, who's been nice. All right, here we go. I have a course. It says new. It's not new. Called Coaching Exponential Groups. And so the course is 6 sessions and a bonus session. So session 1 is developing your coaching structures. We talk about building a biblical coaching model, customizing for your church setting because every church has a uniqueness about them, growing your personal leadership, overcoming the need for control. Session 2 is the role of a coach. So expectations of coaches, their job descriptions, coaching philosophies, stages of coaching, because like I said before, different types of leaders just need different styles of coaching. Communication throughout your ministry year, we cover in session 2. Session 3, identifying and recruiting coaches. So now we know what they're supposed to do. So now we're going to figure out who to recruit. So qualifications, what if they already lead a group? How do you manage that? The importance of the coaching role, helping coaches develop their gifts, using a team approach. Session 4, training new coaches, so initial and ongoing training, effectively using metrics, specialized coaching for different leaders. Session 5, discipling coaches and leaders. We want everybody to grow. So how people grow discipleship model we'll talk about, spiritual next steps. And then session 6 is equipping coaches, which goes into running drills with your coaches, how to make effective group visits, how to resource your coaches for success. And then I do a bonus session that has to do with personality types and coaches. So how do you coach different types of people? Because we're not all the same. We're wired differently. Figure out what your type is. Now, I do a different system. Everybody's into the Enneagram now. I'm just getting into the Enneagram, but this is one that I've used for 30 years. But you would take an online assessment, you would discover your core personality, and then you would apply the principles to coaching. So what is the investment? So let me ask you this. How much is the lack of coaching costing you? How many group leaders are burned out or quit? How many training meetings are half empty? Are your leaders and groups intentionally growing? How many leaders do you answer the phone to talk to or how many times do you answer the phone to talk to leader after leader who needs your support? A lack of coaching might be costing you a great deal because you have to recruit new leaders to replace the ones that dropped out, and you can't get the ones to training, and you're putting out fires and all of that. So this course is Coaching Exponential Groups. It's the 6 sessions that I just described to you. They're available on video, audio, they're transcribed, and you also get the slide deck for each of the 6 sessions. You get a course workbook that goes along. You get articles, job descriptions, coaching questions, and other resources in the course. As part of the course, you have a lifetime membership. You buy it once, it's always yours. You have a 30-day guarantee. If you get this and in the next 30 days you go, well, Alan's a nice guy, but this isn't helpful at all, I'll give you your money back. How about that? If you purchase the course and then you decide later on you want to be in a coaching group or you want to do some other kind of coaching with me, then I'll apply what you pay for the course to the other thing that we do. The other thing that I'm offering, because the course is normally available, But what I'm doing this time around is if you sign up in this season for the course, at the beginning of April, actually April 1st, April Fool's Day, I'm going to do a 2-hour session that's going to be Q&A. And the reason I'm doing that is if you were to get into the course now and you do half the sessions or you do all the sessions in the next month, then what we'll do on the first is we'll take that time to discuss, how do we apply this to your church, and, questions that might come up as you're reviewing the material. And so that's not always available, but I'm making it available this time around. And again, you're going to get the assessment for your personality type. Cost is $97 right now. I've sold this for as much as $249, but I'm selling it for $97. And if you enroll during the webinar today, then I will go ahead and give you a 1-hour personal coaching session, just you and me, for free. So what's better than what I normally do is the 2-hour Q&A that we're going to do on April 1st. And then anytime you want to use it to do the coaching session. So if you want to sign up, you can go over to allenwhite.org/courses. You'll see Coaching Exponential groups there. You click Coaching Exponential groups, and then you'll see a button on that page to click to sign up for the course. And that sounds a little convoluted, but that was the easiest way I could do it. So anyway, you can sign up. So again, next step, if you sign up before the end of the webinar, then I'll give you the free one-on-one. Again, go to allenwhite.org/courses. You could pay by credit card to enroll in the course. And then if you want to pay by check, you can email info@allenwhite.org, and we'll talk about how to pay by check. So I have a few more minutes. I have to pick my daughter up at school. I have to leave in about 15 minutes, but I will, unless you're busy enrolling for the course right now, I will take any of your questions that you might have. So you can either use the chat window or you can unmute yourself and answer a question. But I'm all yours. What are your questions about coaching? And thank you for staying with me during my little presentation there about the course. I had a friend of mine, he's a notable friend, so I won't say his name. He said, I really like content of your webinar. He said it even made it worth tolerating your sales pitch at the end. All right. So Meg asks, can you send us the PowerPoint? Yes, I will. So what I'll do is after the webinar, I will I'll send you a link to the video as well as the PowerPoint presentation, and you can have that as a resource. So yeah. All right. Any other specific questions about coaching? Anything you've tried that we can troubleshoot real quick? Or I'm happy to help. And again, you can type in the chat, or you can turn your mic on and talk. I won't turn everybody's mic on because sometimes there's background noise and stuff. Everybody's got it figured out, or everybody's signing up. I don't know. Brad says he's signing up. Good. Okay. What traits do you look for in a coach? That's a very good question, Lori. So what I look for in a coach is I want somebody that has, some experience with leading a group. I like to see somebody that has some maturity. Not necessarily that they're old, but they've grown in their spiritual life. Because you meet some people that say, well, I've been a Christian for 40 years, but they've just repeated the same one year of their spiritual experience 40 times. But the thing that I look for more than anything else, and this is going to sound so basic, but I mean, I've done this. I made all 10 of these mistakes, and I've done probably 20. But the thing I look for more than anything else is people who care. People who care enough that they're going to pick up the phone and call to encourage a leader. People that care enough that they find out something's going on with a group leader, they're going to do something about it. People who care enough to encourage it. And honestly, I've had people that they made coaching assignments to their paid staff at their church, and the staff still wouldn't coach. And the pastor's like, how do I motivate them? I said, get them all together on Friday and say, who wants a paycheck? Which I was being a little facetious, but I don't think he did that. But I mean, the reality is you could pay people, but you can't pay people to care. So people that are really interested, sometimes people that are reluctant, people that are, they'd be really great and they would have a lot to offer, but they don't see themselves as, being in, having a position over other leaders or anything like that. Another simple thing I do is I look at all of the current leaders you have and say to yourself, look at the list and say, which of these leaders would I like to have 10 more just like them? And then recruit those. Because the idea is that you're inviting people into a role where they're going to be multiplying themselves. So if you have leaders you think, wow, they're not perfect, but they do such a great job, I'd like to have 10 more groups just like it. And then the ones you look at from that list and you go, man, I don't want any more groups like that group. In fact, I don't even know if I want that group. Don't invite that one. And, and this could be a little bit tricky because, I've had people that had actually, one guy had more experience in small groups than I did. And I didn't invite him into my leadership team because he drove me nuts. And you know what? Just because it's difficult doesn't make it more spiritual. All right. Another question, which course would you suggest for a church that has groups going but no coaches? Yeah, so I would say this coaching exponential groups that I was talking about is the one to go with. There's several courses on there. The 3 keys to lasting groups is kind of training on what to do coming out of a church-wide campaign. Leading an exponential group launch is how to do a church-wide campaign. I have a disciple makers course that may be of interest at some point. But yeah, I would say the coaching exponential groups is the one. I apologize. I should have had a link just directly to the one course so it's not confusing. And then I have a curriculum writing course I offer from time to time. I just offered it a couple months ago, so I will be offering it for a while. So anyway, Lori, I hope that answered your question. Did that help? All right. Any other questions or thoughts? I've got a few more minutes. When we hang up, I'll send the link directly to the course to avoid any further confusion. All right. See, a couple of you have signed up. That's nice. I think you'll benefit from it. And like I said, if you don't benefit from it, then just send me an email and say, hey, I really need my money back. But then the other side of it is that I use this coaching course. I do a 12-month coaching group with 5 churches I mentioned earlier, 5 churches at a time. I usually start in January. I do one group a year. But I use the leading exponential groups and the coaching exponential groups courses in the. So if you decide later on to sign up for a coaching group, then we'll do that. You mentioned a few questions to ask when coaches meet with leaders. Do you have a form or list they go through? Okay, so I do, and I don't mean for this to be a gotcha, but I actually have. It's called the 3-2-1 coaching method. And it's a download that's part of this coaching exponential groups course. Now, I'll give you one other resource that's not mine. There's a book called Coaching Questions by a guy named Tony Stolzfus that's up on Amazon. His last name is Stolzfus, Stolzfus, Tony Stolzfus. and he has some outstanding things. If you want a book about it, look for coaching questions online, or you just search coaching questions on Amazon. But I do have a list of questions, and it's kind of an interview. You would sit down, take an hour with a leader, and this again probably for more experienced leaders. I would meet with them 4 times a year, one-on-one, and take this list of questions and kind of give them space to think about what's going on in their group. And so anyway, I don't mean for that one to be a gotcha. I don't have it to give for free, but it is part of the course. So, all right. Any other questions or thoughts? We got 5 more minutes. Hi, Laura. I saw you you snuck in here. Welcome. It's been a while. All right. Well, if you guys have any other questions, you can just email me at the info@alanwhite.org. I'll be happy to answer your questions. Glad to have all of you guys. And if you signed up for the course, I'll be seeing you on the first. You can sign up for the course beyond today. The only incentive today was to sign up during the webinar. You get the free one-on-one. But if you sign up anytime in the next couple of weeks, you can get in on that 2-hour Q&A session on April 1st. So anyway, glad to have you, and thank you for being here. Appreciate you giving me your time, and God bless.